Hello, welcome to the day 2 general session and our second session at this year's Energy Forum that focuses on transportation electrification. In this session, we will be focusing on the critical challenge of ensuring that our transition to electric vehicles is an equitable one. You've probably heard by now that there are substantial benefits available to many diverse communities from the transition to electric vehicles. That's everything from the reduction of harmful air pollution in overburdened communities to the average reduction of rates that many ratepayers will see from better utilization of the electric infrastructure. Just the same, we cannot ignore that many of the benefits of the transition accrue to the owner and driver of the electric vehicle, who promises to see an ever-improving total cost of ownership for EVs relative to conventional vehicles. So for equity, we need to ensure that electric vehicles are a choice that's available to all households and that our programs are helping make that so. And moreover, if we are to truly drive an energy transition in transportation with all of the environmental and economic benefits that that entails, then again, we need to make sure that all households have a way to participate. Now, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter. I am delighted to be joined today by Hiromi Kelty from the City of Palo Alto Utilities. Welcome, Hiromi. And would you please say a few words to our audience about your role with the city?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very honored to be here today. I wish I were in person, but I am the EV program manager with the City of Palo Alto Utilities. And on a personal level, I've been driving an EV now for 7 years, going on 8 years. And I feel like we should all do it. It's fun. It makes sense.
Great. Love that. So today, we'll begin with a little bit about the market context in which the city's programs operate. And then Hiromi will speak to the city's overarching goals and the really wide variety of programs that they offer their customers. We'll talk specifically after that about some of the challenges that multifamily and low and moderate income households face in adopting electric vehicles, and the program that we're running, the progress we've made, the lessons we've learned in that program in serving that audience. And finally, acknowledging that our work here is far from done, we will share some thoughts about the road ahead. Okay, before I turn it over to Hiromi to speak specifically about the city of Palo Alto, I'd like to provide a little bit of information about the California context. Certainly, in many of the regions that CLEAResult serves across North America, coast to coast, we see a sharp increase in electric vehicle sales happening now. And as you may know, California has been the leader in that for some time, with the largest growth in electric vehicles so far. We've reached the point where 10% of new passenger vehicle sales in California are electric vehicles, and we're very close to reaching the 1 million electric vehicle on the road mark. Definitely a significant milestone. And that's been helped along by some pretty aggressive policies. And I've included a few here that I think are among the most significant. First, there's the California Air Resources Board's Zero Emission Vehicle, or ZEV regulation, which requires that automakers, starting in 2018, increase the ZEV share of their California vehicle sales by 2.5% annually. So that's growing quickly. And then you also have the low carbon fuel standard, which requires distributors of on-road vehicle fuels to meet increasingly stringent carbon content requirements of those fuels, or to purchase credits as offsets. And that creates a market for providers of low carbon fuels, such as electricity, to sell credits in that market and then generate revenues that can be used to support other transportation electrification efforts. And finally, we have the executive orders from the state, which have grown increasingly progressive towards electric vehicle adoption and have now been echoed by other states and provinces, and maybe most recently by the federal government. And what those do is those set a clear vision for the future that help consumers, automakers, and of course utilities to plan for the future with more certainty. And with that, I'll hand it to you, Hiromi.
I heard yesterday Rivian delivered their first truck. So yeah, most people I think have heard of Palo Alto, but I think it'd be helpful to understand where we are from a larger population and energy perspective. We're a small city of 70,000 residents located in the middle of Silicon Valley in between San Francisco and San Jose. Palo Alto is home to companies such as Hewlett-Packard and Tesla, and the place of residence for many company founders. And they in turn hire many graduates from Stanford University, which is located in our backyard. It's a progressive city and our residents tend to be very engaged. The City of Palo Alto Utilities is publicly owned and provides electric, natural gas, water, and fiber optic services to our 29,000 customers. We're uniquely positioned to respond to the community's environmental values because our policies are set by our City Council. As you can see from the pie chart above, about 85% of our electricity is used by the commercial sector. In non-pandemic times, our population more than doubles during the day with commuters. The pie chart below shows our current electric supply. And as you can see, Palo Alto has made significant progress towards taking the carbon out of our electric portfolio. Our resource mix is now 100% carbon neutral, with over half of our electricity coming from large hydropower projects and a quarter coming from utility scale solar. So that said, Palo Alto is absolutely an exciting place to be working on electric vehicle initiatives. Next slide. So Palo Alto is committed to rapid decarbonization for the benefit of our customers and future generations. We have one of the most aggressive carbon reduction goals in the country, 80% reduction from 1990 levels by 2030. To put that into perspective, it's 20 years ahead of the state of California's 80 by 50 goal. However, based on the latest IPCC report, and let me see if I could say this right, it's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, all cities will need to meet emission goals as aggressive as ours if we hope to avoid the world warming 2 degrees Celsius, which is the threshold at which most climate scientists agree the world will experience the most destructive and dangerous effects of climate change. So this chart shows our overall greenhouse gas emissions from both Palo Alto municipal operations and community-wide emissions in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Each different color represents the various sources of emissions that contribute to our overall greenhouse gases. If we include natural gas offsets, emissions are down about 56.5% from the 1990 baseline, largely due to the fact that we went carbon neutral in 2013. And that's great. But our 80 by 30 target is to reduce emissions to 150,000 metric tons of carbon. So you can see that we have a long way to go. Palo Alto still needs to reduce about 300,000 metric tons of carbon from current levels. The orange bar, road transportation, represents Palo Alto's largest source of greenhouse gases, followed by natural gas use, the beige bar, both of which have not decreased very much since 1990. And what does that mean for emissions from transportation? Well, we need to reduce 200,000 metric tons of carbon by 2030. Palo Alto's goal for 80% emissions reduction by 2030 is bold and ambitious, and it'll require monumental efforts in policy and community engagement, along with partnerships with third-party vendors like CLEAResult to help us get there. Next slide. Here's another look at our emissions. The main source of greenhouse gases in Palo Alto are simple. A third comes from natural gas consumption in buildings, and 2/3 mainly from vehicles. Road transportation, the big red section, represents Palo Alto's largest source of greenhouse gases at about 65%. So last year we worked with a consultant to learn more about our emissions and was surprised to learn that about 1/3 of road transportation emissions is from residents, 1/3 from commuters, and 1/3 from visitors to Palo Alto. And that would include all those delivery trucks. Now going back to the big question of by 2030, how do we reduce 200,000 metric tons of carbon from road transportation? Like James said, Governor Newsom, he's still our governor today, is trying to help California along. And it was a year ago in September that he announced that starting 2035, all in-state sales of new passenger cars and trucks must be zero emission vehicles. According to the California Air Resources Board, for the time being, they say that 2.4 metric tons of carbon are removed for every fossil fuel vehicle replaced by an EV. Well, at 2.4 metric tons a car, even if 100% of the 50,000 vehicles registered in Palo Alto become zero emissions by 2030, we can only reduce 120,000 metric tons of carbon. The good news, though, is that study after study is showing that, like James said, the total cost of ownership of EVs is cheaper than driving a gas car, especially when you factor in the price of gas and maintenance costs. In Palo Alto, where electricity is clean and relatively cheap, it particularly makes sense to drive electric. Next slide. So let's take a look at the vehicle landscape in Palo Alto. The grand total of all electric vehicles registered in Palo Alto in 2020 is 4,860, which is a 9% increase from 2019. Most EVs were in the residential sector, grand total 4,500, which means that 10% of Palo Alto residents are now driving an EV, which is exciting because I feel like we're finally at double digits. The majority of EVs are registered at single-family homes, about 86% versus 14% at multifamily, which is pretty low when you consider that multifamily accounts for 42% of residences. And I also want to note that the 2020 data is skewed because of the pandemic. I don't know how it was in your territory, but in Palo Alto, residential car registrations actually decreased 11%. So we'll have to kind of see if that's a trend or that was like an off year. And I just want to say that, you know, anyone who isn't getting this kind of data, it is available to every utility through the DMV. You just have to ask for it. To chip away at the carbon reduction goals, the utility department, which I work for, also works closely with the transportation department, which is focused on reducing vehicle miles traveled and reducing single occupancy vehicles. As for utilities, we have three main roles. Number one, increase EVs registered in Palo Alto from 5,000 to 28,000, or 44% of all vehicles by 2030. Number two, Palo Alto is a city where during non-pandemic times, the population doubles during the workday. So we have a responsibility to facilitate the increase of EV commute vehicles from single digits, which is where it's at now, to 40% by 2030. And number three, we need to facilitate the development of public and private charging networks to support high levels of EV penetration. Next slide. So we provide a wide array of programs to our customers, starting from DSM programs and now decarbonization pilots and programs. One of the programs I'm really proud to have been a part of is the Home Efficiency Genie program with CLEAResult. In 2019, we won the National Energy Innovator Award from the American Public Power Association for this program. It has extremely high customer satisfaction. We've received Net Promoter Score of 9 out of 10. 94% of our Home Efficiency Genie customers are very satisfied with the City of Palo Alto utilities, which is nice because everyone else, the satisfaction rate is more like 76%. The program started out as an efficiency-focused phone consultation and home audit program back in 2015. Well, over the years, our priorities evolved, and it's been great because CLEAResult has been willing to evolve with us, especially as home electrification became a priority. It started out first with launching a heat pump water heater pilot program. And when we talked to CLEAResult, they were willing to have their advisors talk to our customers about heat pump water heaters. And from that, I asked, well, can we do an electrification assessment while your technician is on site at someone's home looking at all the equipment? And that developed into creating an electrification report. And today I'm no longer involved with the program, but I understand that they are providing an individualized electrification roadmap to our customers, which is great. Traditional utilities programs are funded mainly by public benefit charges, but the newer sustainability related programs are funded through some newer sources. For example, on the EV side, we have the California Air Resource Board's Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program, which James talked about earlier. We have grant money from California Energy Commission's Cali VIP, or California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Project. And we've also received grants from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District for installing public EV chargers. So for now, we have no plans to use ratepayer funds for EV programs, and we do feel very fortunate to have other sources of funding to help our city strive to reach its EV goals. When we initially began planning, When we initially began planning transportation electrification programs back in 2016, with community input, at the time we decided not to offer money to early EV adopters or wealthy companies who were already on their way to installing EV charging infrastructure. Our goal was to target the hard to reach customers. And to date, programs we have offered for transportation electrification include EV charger rebates for multifamily and nonprofit customers, transformer upgrade rebates for single family homes and for multifamily and nonprofits. We've done workshops, ride and drives. We have an online EV calculator tool. We've installed over 100 city-owned EV chargers for public use. And last but not least, we have the EV Technical Assistance Program, which we work with CLEAResult on. And I do keep an ongoing list of EV program ideas, and we're always looking into ways we can raise awareness and encourage EV adoption among all customer segments. Next slide. So I think people think in Palo Alto, people are rich. Yes, we have many wealthy people in Palo Alto. The median income here is over $160,000 a year. But 23% of the population is under 300% federal poverty levels. That's an annual income of under $80,000 for a family of 4. And the majority of these households live in multifamily residences. EVs, like many new technologies, have been first adopted by wealthier customers. But with fast declining battery prices, a variety of federal, state, and local incentives, and an emerging used vehicle market, we think there's an opportunity for every driver. Already in Palo Alto, more than 1 in 3 new vehicle purchases is an EV. But for us to reach our carbon reduction goals, we need to focus on the harder to reach audiences to enable EV adoption by lower income residents and commuters. But to do so, even with generous rebates for EV charger installations, it became clear that we needed additional support to install EV charging infrastructure at multifamily, schools, and nonprofit organizations. James?
Yes, thank you, Hiromi. And these figures on this slide are from a study that our client analytics team did a few years back about the residential program, the Home Efficiency Genie program, to understand the participation in that program. And while, as Hiromi noted, it probably won't surprise anyone to know that the average home income in Palo Alto is well above the national average, it was still a bit surprising to see that the participation within the program skewed even to the top of that range. And unfortunately, it was relatively low at the lower end of the range. And as we asked ourselves, why is that? Certainly there are many factors, but one is that the Home Efficiency Genie program really it takes a whole house approach. So it really caters more to the single family homeowner. And as Hiromi mentioned, other data sources show that you have roughly 40% of the population in multifamily, and that among those, nearly a quarter are low income. So, on the basis of this past analysis and those other data points, it's pretty clear that if we want the program to be equitable and helping everyone be able to transition to electric vehicles, which we absolutely do, then the program needs to have a significant focus on multifamily properties. Hiromi?
So what are the estimated EV charging needs at multifamily properties? Like we've said, over 40% of households live in multifamily dwellings. We have over 850 sites. We know that the majority of lower income residents live in multifamily residences. And from DMV data, we also know that only 1% of EVs are registered at multifamily. So for anyone who has tried installing EV chargers at a multifamily property, you know that there is no one size fits all solution. I wish there were. However, for EV penetration to reach the city's sustainability and climate action plan goals of 44% EVs by 2030, EV charging must be made available to multifamily residents. In less than 10 years, this translates to increasing EV adoption rates at multifamily from 1% to 33%. It means increasing the number of EV charging ports at multifamily buildings from 100 ports, which is where we're at now, to more like 6,000 charging ports in under 10 years. Next slide.
Yes, so clearly there is a large need in multifamily, and yet, as many of you no doubt know, delivering any program in multifamily is difficult, and even more so when that program is focused on relatively costly infrastructure upgrades. There are a host of barriers that one faces, awareness, technical, financial, those are kind of the categories we put them into, but within each, there are myriad challenges. In the area of awareness, for example, for this audience, we find one barrier is a perception that EVs aren't for us, driven in part by the success that some EV luxury vehicles have had thus far. While that's changing, there are an ever increasing array of electric vehicle options, and as Hiromi mentioned, an emerging used EV market. Still, the perception remains and is a challenge. Also, you have fairly fundamental understanding of how electric vehicles work and the charging requirements that they have, something that we kind of consider EV 101 education. That is a general need as well. In the technical area, examples, certainly most people think first of the electrical capacity, which is indeed a challenge. These properties were not designed with the idea of having, tens or 100 kilowatts of electric vehicle charging at the property. And that is a challenge. We have some tactics to address it, minimize the challenge to the extent possible, but it remains a challenge. And then along with the infrastructure, you also find that a lot of it is aging and not great condition, and that poses a barrier to doing any kind of project. And in the financial area, fundamentally, the capital budgets aren't there. A multifamily property owner was probably budgeting for replacing the roof every 10 to 15 years or something, but never foresaw the need for electric vehicle charging, so the budget isn't there. And of course, because this is multifamily, we have to acknowledge the infamous split incentive barrier, which is certainly important. So, not to drown everyone in barriers, we knew all of these would be there going into this program, and so we designed the program to address these. So this is how the EV Technical Assistance Program works. First, bears mentioning that the city has used some of those state funding sources we discussed earlier to establish a pretty generous incentive for the multifamily properties of up to $8,000 per charge port installed, which really goes a long way, can address most, if not all, of the cost challenges for many properties, as long as we're thoughtful about how we design the projects. So what the program focuses on is making sure that, first, the right pairing of those incentives to the project is made to address the financial barriers. But then additionally, the barriers of awareness and technical needs, that the program also rises to meet the specific barriers that each property has, which vary from property to property. So what we do is we work to develop a charging project that is responsive to those specific barriers. We do that by first identifying the decision makers and engaging them, addressing the awareness issues and their questions to bring them to the point of being ready to explore an EV charging project. And then from there, we do a site assessment where we gather information about the property, about the tenants, about the parking layout, about the electrical infrastructure. And we use that to then scope out a project that both includes a load calculation and the EV parking layout. From there, once we have a scope, there's typically a period of deliberation and stakeholder consultation where you may get some input. The scope of the project may be revised a bit, and then we can move on to the contractor bidding and permitting and installation part of the process. With this process and this program, we are working towards a goal of 400 new EV charging spaces by 2024. So it is just the beginning of getting to that overarching goal Hiromi mentioned, but at least making a strong start and establishing some of the processes and best practices that will be needed to get all the way. So this program launched in the middle of 2019, or I should say that's when we started work on the program, and it got off to a relatively quick start. By the fourth quarter, we were doing direct outreach and starting to raise the awareness through workshops and engagement of this target audience. And then came 2020, and of course the pandemic hit, and things slowed down. We were able to complete a handful of site assessments before the pandemic really hit and field services were put on pause. But from there, we had several months where we basically were on pause, and until we could kind of redesign a bit and revamp the program with a virtual assessment. So for that, our engineering and program team worked with Hiromi and other stakeholders to rethink the process, determine sort of what were the critical data points, how many of those could we collect remotely? How many did we need to rely on the on-site manager to collect and share with us? But once we got all that figured out, we were able to relaunch with primarily virtual assessments. And since then, we've been building up steam. At this point, we have completed 32 property EV charging assessments. And in 2021, we're now focused on moving those assessments onto installations. And at the same time, reflecting on the data that we've captured and the lessons learned thus far to think about how the program can be enhanced going forward. So among those lessons learned, a few things stand out. First is that we cannot overemphasize the need for that sustained engagement with the property managers, property owners, decision makers throughout the process. Even after we've done that awareness raising and many properties become interested in doing an EV charging project, still it's not going to be their top priority. They have many competing priorities. So us having those regular check-ins, addressing questions that come up, helping troubleshoot issues along the way is important to keep those projects moving forward. Second, and this is kind of a restatement, but bears restating that as we get into many of these properties, we find the electrical systems are not really up to snuff. They 30, 40 or more years old without really having been touched. So they're not compliant with current codes and safety standards in many cases, and that can add certainly scope and cost to a project and just is more to figure out from a technical standpoint. But we do figure it out, and ultimately, that's enabling the EV charging project, and it's also improving the safety overall of the property. So significant co-benefit there. And finally, while we are very fortunate to have the financial resources that are available to incentivize these projects and move them forward, take most of that cost out, there is still the complexity of getting the project going and contracted and managing it throughout that the property owner at this point bears some involvement in. And really to get things moving more quickly, we're exploring something more like a turnkey, reducing that complexity to the point where it's a yes, no, go, no go type decision for the property owner. And then we can just kind of take it from there. And we think that may help to accelerate the pace of things. Thus far, we have 2 projects that are in installation. In part, things were slowed down by the pandemic, but just the same, we're looking to pick up the pace going forward to both meet the program objectives and also contribute to the city's overarching sustainability and equity goals. Hiromi, the road ahead.
Yeah, I think designing a program from the ground up is always a heavy lift. And there are a lot of learnings along the way. And yes, it's been slow going, but like James said, right now we have many properties in the queue actively working with CLEAResult, and we're very excited about that. I think one of the biggest things we've learned is, especially from the Home Efficiency Genie program as well, when you're talking about having to deal with big electrical, it becomes so much more complex than just swapping out light bulbs to LEDs or adding more insulation or weather stripping. It's very complex, and the larger the property, the more difficult, the more challenges are involved. So that said, I think the success to programs having to do with sustainability are going to be high touch. You need people that are willing to get their hands dirty, boots on the ground, really working with the property owners, as well as the tenants. And we'll continue to expand access in the hard to reach customer segments with technical support. But what we're really looking forward to is launching this pilot program within EV technical assistance which will provide direct installation of EV charging at low-income multifamily properties, and see if that'll move the needle a little bit, because these properties, like James said, have so many other priorities. Installing EV chargers is not one of them. And so we're working really hard to change their minds. And I think, we also have to really work with the tenants and let them know about how much cheaper it'll be for them in the lifetime of their vehicle if they switch to EV. And we know we've set challenging goals for ourselves, but this is what we have to do to meet our climate goals. And we hope sharing our experience acts as a catalyst for more good ideas, which I hope you'll share with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hiromi. And this is kind of the tip of the iceberg, I think, of of discussion. So there's many other topics we could cover both in the Q&A here or in this afternoon's discussion session. So welcome you all to join us then. But I think with that, we can open it up to some questions.
Thanks, you two. Really stunning presentation. I'm particularly personally struck by, Hiromi, what you've been able to accomplish, and in relation to the overall scope, particularly when we think beyond cities like Palo Alto. So, kudos to you and team, and it's amazing the mountain that we still have to climb. I'd like to start with a question for James. James, you spoke a lot about engaging property owners and managers, but what about tenants, right? Can you share your thoughts on the importance of like tenants engagement and how the programs may want to add or change in respect to working with tenants?
Yeah, definitely. I'll start, and then I'll invite Hiromi to add her thoughts. But the primary audience of the program has been the property manager and property owner who can make the investment decision. But, very often in the multifamily segment, we hear the kind of quick rejection that, oh, my tenants don't have EVs, or my tenants don't want EVs. And, I'm not convinced that's true. And in fact, we have done some outreach to tenants to kind of build a little bit of a grassroots movement. That hasn't been a widespread initiative of the program, but we've done a bit of that and found that there is interest. So it's often just that interest has not been consolidated and kind of surfaced up to the property owner. So I think that's something that we will explore ways to do more of going forward. Hiromi, do you have anything to add on that?
I think, one of our jobs in utilities, I feel like right now, the most important is raising awareness. That's with property owners as well as tenants, because I think people just don't know. I think the biggest thing people don't know are all of the incentives available to them to make the cost of purchasing or leasing an EV so much cheaper than what it seems, because I think most people think EVs are very expensive. But and especially for low-income customers, there are a lot of incentives which make EVs even more cheaper. So I think that is on us to really get the word out that, look, we're going to work on helping get infrastructure in, but here's what's available to you when it comes to looking at purchasing an EV.
And I'm not no expert on the real estate market in Palo Alto, but throughout the country and during the pandemic, we've seen a slight softening in the multifamily market as people wanted to get away from multifamily situations. So, kind of on the flip side, have you seen building owners or managers who have seen the value proposition of taking advantage of a program like this to offer, kind of expanding charging opportunities as a way to lure in tenants?
I think a lot of property owners are starting to feel like they need to look at the possibility of installing EV chargers, because I think our customers are starting to ask for it, including multifamily residents. And also from a property manager's perspective, it's customer retention as well, because right now there aren't too many apartments that have EV chargers. So my understanding is the EV drivers are seeking those properties out and will probably stay put longer, which is beneficial to the property owner.
Yeah, as far as messaging, I think, portraying it as sort of an inevitability it's a matter of time until your property will need this, and the incentives are available now.
Yes.
That's been a strong message.
That makes a lot of sense. Hiromi, it seems like there are a lot of ways to treat the cost distribution of system upgrades that are triggered by charger installs. Can you say a little bit about how the city of Palo Alto is treating for that, and then maybe how that influenced your incentive design?
So, we're learning that a lot of our building stock is older in our city. There isn't room really to build new. So what we're discovering is about half of the multifamily properties in town will need a new transformer. And that tends to be very expensive. Luckily for us, the engineers in the utilities department are willing to work very closely with us because they're trying to keep an eye on the grid, the health of the grid, and the potential new loads that'll be added because of all of this electrification that needs to happen. So we work very closely with them, but it's a constant battle because to upgrade a transformer, it's not only the cost, but it's also the FTEs. You need staff to do that. And, we, like other organizations, are probably kind of feeling really, it's tough. It's tough to try to be able to do all of the upgrades we need to do as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think we hear that certainly from Palo Alto and from other clients we work with as well. So from the program side, what we've been trying to do is make it as easy as possible for those engineers to understand what the project is, to serve up the information in the most convenient way to them, so that it's not reducing their effort entirely by any means, but it is hopefully our involvement reduces some of the back and forth. They can just get the information they need immediately and just do the part they need to do rather than kind of going back and forth between different stakeholders to figure it out. I think we're still looking for ways to that we can help reduce that burden on the engineering design team at the utility. But inevitably, with the scale of what we're talking about doing over the next decade or two, there's going to be a lot of need there.
That makes a lot of sense. James, you mentioned a topic that is near and dear to my heart with the virtual assessments. Could you talk a little bit about
like that?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Can you talk a little bit about the feedback that you may have gotten from kind of any given stakeholder on the use and the pivot to virtual assessments?
Yeah, well, I guess personally, I thought people might be a little put out because they're used to this white glove service that sure. We were initially starting out to provide. But I think people were really understanding of the transition. Certainly it's new for some people to kind of walk around and guide us with the technology around their properties. So you got to talk them through it. But it was the context of a pandemic. So obviously that was terrible, but in some ways, I think it made people more receptive to change than they might otherwise have been. So we didn't get much pushback. I don't know that we got people like raving about wanting to do more and more, but the process just worked, and that was success.
Was it typically like a representative of the multifamilies, like manager or owners, that would walk us through the virtual assessment?
Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
And from my perspective, I was really grateful that a virtual alternative was being offered to our customers, because otherwise any kind of site visit had completely stopped initially. So this was a great alternative.
Have you folks made any headway with partnering with large property management groups that, as a way to get to potentially multiple sites?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, not just for multifamily, but large nonprofits that have properties in all cities around the country. Yes, and the idea is, if someone agrees to work with us on their property in Palo Alto, hopefully they'll look at all the neighboring cities where they have properties and work
Sure.
on installing EV chargers as well. And CLEAResult does work with some of our neighboring territories, so it really helps streamline the conversation. If they're going to work with one, hopefully they'll eventually work with all of them.
Yeah, particularly in the affordable housing segment, there are a few major players who develop and manage affordable housing around the Bay Area. So the fact that we can work with them through, there's the area's divided into many different territories, but we're working with them across multiple territories, and I think that's a significant benefit to them.
Makes a lot of sense. You mentioned earlier some kind of early synergies in between the EE Genie program and kind of electrification paths that help towards EV adoption goals. Does the city of Palo Alto have kind of a potential for other synergies with other multifamily programs coming down the pike that may help with multifamily EV adoption as well?
It's funny that you say that. We're in the process of kind of revamping all of our traditional residential programs. And yes, I mean, I definitely want to see EV chargers as part of that conversation. And so, yes, we're currently working on that. I feel like, it used to be helping people swap out light bulbs and put in insulation, but now it also has to be helping them electrify their home where it makes sense, and also to put in that EV charger sooner rather than later. Because if you're going to have an electrician come out and do work at your property, might as well get the outlet put in. And it doesn't even have to be for a level 2 faster charger. But to let them educate them that, you could just use any outlet to plug in your EV. You won't get a lot of charge overnight, but it should be enough to get you maybe, 30 miles a day. So yes, we will take every opportunity to educate all of our customers.
No, again, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think really this like triple overlap between electrification, EVs, and energy efficiency has been just a great case study for thinking holistically about how customers engage with multiple customer-facing programs. Kind of just for fun, Hiromi, do you have an EV? And do you have a memory maybe of your first EV or?
Yes, I do. Our very first EV was probably in 2014. And as soon as we got it, we decided to take it on a road trip from Palo Alto to Seattle. We had barely had the car for, it was days. And so we packed the family up and the dog into our car. And, it was a great way to test it out, to see what it would actually be like, the experience, and looking for the superchargers and charging. And the kids hated it. And they swore up and down that after that trip, they will never take a road trip in an EV again, because it adds so much more time. My husband and I thought it was great. Of course. But the kids did not like it. Now, many years later, yes, it adds time, but I feel like, charging, first of all, has gotten so much faster. It used to be when people would say fast charger, it could be like a 50 kilowatt, 80 kilowatt, 100 kilowatt. A lot of the Tesla superchargers were 125 kilowatt, but now they even have 250 kilowatt superchargers. So it's so fast. I start worrying, what's that going to do to the battery in the car? But it's very handy when you're going on long road trips.
What would you say, what would you say is that time difference between, your supercharging experience on that first trip to Seattle versus, a quick charge now?
Well, let's just say, I would say I always add a couple hours in my head. It depends on how long the road trip is, but 2 to 3 hours if I were doing a trip to Seattle. To a trip from, San Francisco to Los Angeles, I would say I always add 1 or 2 hours in my head. And not so much because the charging takes so much time, but while I'm charging, I use that as an opportunity to eat lunch and go to the bathroom and walk the dog. And so I do a lot more than if I were driving a gas vehicle. I would just fill up with gas and keep going. The other thing is, a lot of these chargers along main corridors are getting so much more crowded. You really have to time yourself. So when we were driving home from Oregon last summer, we left at like 4 o'clock in the morning to get to our first supercharger as early as possible because we knew there would be a huge line on July 4th weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Great point.
So that is the reality, that the demand is now growing tremendously.
Mhm.